The black sedan pulled into the driveway of the quiet home in Herrlingen with the practiced precision of a predator. The engine died, but the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was a physical weight pressing against the windows and the walls. Inside the house, the man who had once commanded the vast, shifting sands of North Africa watched from behind a curtain. He did not see enemies across a parched battlefield. He saw two men in uniform, sent by the very leadership he had served with unmatched distinction. They carried no medals for his bravery and no new orders for the front. They carried an ultimatum that would end a legend, not with the thunder of artillery, but with a silent, bitter choice made in the back of a moving car. The man known as the Desert Fox realized in that chilling moment that the most treacherous terrain he had ever crossed was not the Sahara, but the corridors of power back home. The tension of that October day in 1944 was the culmination of years of shifting loyalties and the dark gravity of a failing war effort. For much of the conflict, Erwin Rommel had been the face of military brilliance, a commander whose tactical speed and unpredictable movements earned him the respect of even his fiercest opponents. He was the soldiers' general, often found at the very front of the line, sharing the dust and the danger with his men. But as the tide began to turn, a different kind of shadow began to stretch over his career. The brilliance that once made him indispensable now made him a person of interest in a web of suspicion that was tightening around the highest levels of the command structure. He was a man out of time, caught between the duty he felt toward his soldiers and the growing realization that the path his nation had taken was leading toward total destruction. The two generals who stepped out of the car, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maisel, were not there to discuss the defense of the borders. They walked with a stiffness that suggested their mission was one of grim necessity. As they entered the house, the air seemed to grow colder. Rommel, still recovering from severe injuries sustained when his staff car was strafed by an Allied plane months earlier, met them with a stoicism that had become his trademark. He knew that in a system built on absolute, unquestioning obedience, even the slight suggestion of doubt was enough to seal a person's fate. The Desert Fox was no longer just a general. He was a potential rival, a man with enough public support to pose a genuine threat to the status quo. The internal atmosphere of the High Command had become one of extreme paranoia, where loyalty was measured by the depth of one's silence. To understand how a national hero ends up in the back of a car with a lethal vial, one must look at the widening cracks in the foundation of the era's leadership. By the time the Allied forces had established their foothold in Normandy, the whispers of discontent within the officer corps had grown into a dull roar. There were those who believed that the only way to save the nation was to end the conflict through negotiation. But such thoughts were considered the highest form of betrayal. Rommel's name had begun to appear in the notebooks and forced confessions of those already under investigation. Whether he was a central figure in these plans, or merely a sympathetic listener who stayed silent out of a sense of duty, remains a point of intense debate. In the eyes of the investigators, however, there was no distinction between a conspirator and a man who failed to report one. The meeting in the study was brief and clinical. Burgdorf and Maisel presented Rommel with a file of evidence, much of it circumstantial or extracted under extreme pressure from others, that allegedly linked him to those who sought to change the course of the leadership. They did not ask for his defense. They presented him with a cold, calculated set of options. He could choose to go before the People's Court, a venue known for its staged trials and brutal outcomes. If he chose this path, his staff would be purged, His family would be stripped of their protections, and his legacy would be erased in a public spectacle of shame. Or he could take his own life. The state, in exchange for his silence, would maintain the narrative of his heroism. He would be given a state funeral with full military honors, and his family would be kept safe from the repercussions that followed a charge of high treason. The psychological pressure of that moment is almost impossible to grasp. A man who had faced the most daunting odds on the battlefield, who had maneuvered divisions across thousands of miles of hostile territory, was now trapped in a small room in his own home. The choice was not about his own survival. That had already been decided the moment the black sedan arrived. The choice was about the survival of his wife, Lucy, and his son, Manfred. The system he served did not value his genius as much as it valued its own self-preservation. It was a dark reminder of how quickly the heroes of a movement can be sacrificed when the tide of fortune begins to recede and the fear of internal collapse takes hold.
Erwin, what is it?
Rommel asked for a few moments to speak with his family. He went to his wife and told her, with a voice that betrayed no fear, that he would be dead within the hour. To his son, he explained that the authorities had cornered him, and that the only way to ensure their safety was to follow the orders of the men waiting in the hallway. The stoicism he had displayed in the deserts of Africa remained, but it was now directed toward a final, personal sacrifice. He put on his famous leather coat, the one that had seen the dust of a dozen campaigns, and took his marshal's baton. He walked out of the house and toward the waiting car, his head held high, as if he were simply departing for another high-level briefing. The neighbors watched from their windows as the legendary commander climbed into the back seat with the two visitors. To any casual observer, it looked like a routine departure. The car drove a short distance from the house, turning away from the main road and into a wooded area where the trees cast long, skeletal shadows across the pavement. The driver and one of the generals stepped out, leaving Rommel alone in the back seat with the means to carry out the ultimatum. Within minutes, the process was complete. The man who had been a symbol of an era's military might was gone. The official report would later state that he had succumbed to the injuries he had sustained weeks earlier, a narrative that the public, hungry for a hero to believe in, largely accepted at the time. The state funeral was held with all the pomp and circumstance promised, a grand masquerade to hide the internal rot that was consuming the leadership from within. The very men who had forced the poison into his hand stood by the graveside, offering hollow tributes to his brilliance. It was a masterclass in the manipulation of public perception, ensuring that the legend of the Desert Fox remained intact for the sake of national morale, even as the reality of his end was buried beneath layers of secrecy. This betrayal of one of their own highlights the extreme fragility of power built on fear. When Rommel was winning battles, he was an asset to be celebrated. The moment he became a symbol of potential change or a voice of realism in the face of inevitable defeat, he became a target. The aftermath of his passing was marked by a chilling commitment to the lie. The top leadership sent condolences to his widow, praising the man they had just executed in all but name. It was a dark finale to a career that was as complex as it was influential. Only after the conflict ended and the archives were opened did the true nature of that October afternoon come to light, revealing the depth of the betrayal. Historians continue to debate Rommel's true intentions, questioning if he was a man of conscience who who realized too late the nature of the regime he served, or a professional soldier who simply got caught in the crossfire of a desperate power struggle. There is evidence to support both sides, but the tragedy of his end lies in the contradiction of his life. He was a man of immense talent and tactical foresight who found himself serving a cause that was ultimately hollow and destructive. His story is a thriller, not because of the battles he fought, but because of the psychological cage he inhabited during his final months. The danger he faced was not from the soldiers across the trenches, but from the men who sat at the same tables as him. The men who looked at his popularity and saw a threat rather than a strength. The silence that followed his departure from Herrlingen that day was the silence of a collapsing system. When a nation begins to devour its most capable and celebrated individuals out of a sense of insecurity, the end is usually near. The Desert Fox's final journey was a microcosm of a larger collapse, a moment where honor, loyalty, and truth were all sacrificed at the altar of political survival. The betrayal was not just of a man, but of the very principles the military claimed to uphold. In the decades since, the image of Erwin Rommel has remained a subject of intense fascination. He is often portrayed as the good general, a figure who stood apart from the darker elements of his time. While this image has been scrutinized and complicated by modern research, the circumstances of his death continue to evoke a sense of profound injustice. It serves as a stark warning about the nature of absolute power and the lengths to which a desperate leadership will go to maintain its grip on control. The car that drove away from the house in Herrlingen carried more than just a general. It carried the shattered illusions of a man who believed that service and excellence would protect him from the whims of those above him. He learned, in the most final way possible, that in a world of shadows and paranoia, no amount of glory can shield you from the reach of a system that has decided you are no longer useful. The betrayal was total, calculated, and cold, executed with the same efficiency that Rommel himself had once used on the battlefield. As we look back at this dark chapter, the conflict between the individual and the state remains a central theme. Rommel's story is a dark thriller because it plays out in the quiet moments, the glance out a window, the hushed conversation in a hallway, the choice made in a stationary car on a lonely road. It is a story of how the very structures designed to protect a nation can become the instruments of its internal destruction. The Desert Fox was hunted down not by his enemies, but by his own side, a victim of the very machine he helped make famous. Today, the house in Herrlingen stands as a quiet witness to those events. The road where the car stopped is just another stretch of pavement, but the memory of that October day persists as a testament to the complexity of human loyalty and the devastating cost of betrayal. It reminds us that history is often written in the shadows, and that the most significant battles are sometimes fought within the hearts and minds of those caught in the gears of power. The legend of the Desert Fox continues to endure, but it is forever shadowed by the image of that black sedan and the two generals who came to call. It is a reminder that even the most brilliant tactical mind cannot always find a way out of a trap set by those he once called allies. In the end, the man who could navigate the trackless wastes of the Sahara found himself on a path with only one exit, a path carved by the hands of those who feared his influence more than they valued his life. The legacy of this event serves as a somber reflection on the nature of authority and the fragility of a hero's status. It suggests that the true measure of a society is not how it treats its enemies, but how it treats its own when the pressure of failure becomes overwhelming. The betrayal of Erwin Rommel remains one of the most poignant examples of a talent destroyed by the very system that created it. As the sun set on that October day, the world remained unaware of what had truly transpired in the woods. A hero's death was being manufactured, a story was being told, and a family was being forced into a lifetime of silence. But truth has a way of emerging from the shadows, eventually revealing the cold mechanics of a betrayal that turned a national icon into a casualty of internal fear. The story of the Desert Fox's end is not just a military history. It is a timeless thriller about the high cost of standing at the intersection of fame, duty, and a crumbling power structure. He was a man who lived by the sword and died by a pen stroke and a poison vial, a victim of the very paranoia he had once helped defend. The silence of Herrlingen remains, a quiet echo of a day when the desert's most famous fox finally ran out of places to hide.